What's up, Earth Rockers? It's Bush Avatar here to talk about Castlevania Dracula X. Again, you maybe, if you're one of the 20 people who watched my first Dracula X videos in this channel, you may be surprised to see that I'm revisiting this game. But this game is actually the entire reason that this whole series of me going back to the older Castlevania games exists. Because this is a game that I played a while ago, and that I really didn't like when I first played. I've since... and I had some complaints at the time. My biggest complaint about the game when I played it the first time had to do with the pacing. Specifically with Richter's movement speed, because you can't exactly tell right now because I'm doing something kind of goofy. But Richter in Dracula X moves more slowly than he does in Rondo of Blood. That's really just kind of like only part of the game's general, that's I guess, or a centerpiece of the game's general problem, or the problem that I had with the game rather at the time, which was the slower pace. I played Dracula X right after I played Rondo of Blood, and I knew going into it that it was not going to be a port of Rondo of Blood, like I knew that much, but I didn't really realize I wasn't ready for how different the game would feel. And so because I had come from playing Rondo of Blood, which is, in my opinion, like the greatest Castlevania game ever made, I was like, going from that to this was like, oh my god, what have I gotten myself into? This game is like horribly slow, and like there's like, and if I try to go faster by jumping, I just like jump into enemies. This is so annoying. But then in the interim between then and now, I kept on seeing people talking about this game on like message boards, and then like a couple of YouTube comments, people saying like, you know, this game really isn't that bad. Like, people say this game's bad, but you know, if you go into it with a certain mindset. And at first I was completely like opposed to that. I'm like, what are these people talking about? This game is trash. This game is like, you can't fucking move. Like, but then eventually, after I finished Curse of Darkness, I said to myself, actually, no, it was before that. I basically found myself in a position over the summer where I was going to be without any, like, advanced technology. So I wouldn't be able to collect any, like, PS2 footage or anything like that. I was going to have, like, a week straight of just, like, my low-power laptop and all the emulators I had installed on that. So I decided, well, as long as I've got this week of nothing else to do, really, why don't I just go back and try this game again? Why don't I go back, I'll try this game again, I'll go into it with like an open mind, and I'll try to experience this game the way that these people who I see on the internet have experienced this game. And upon my second foray into the game, I realized that I was horribly, horribly wrong in my first impressions, and that this was primarily because I was just coming off of Rondo, and I think almost anything out of Rondo would have been a disappointment, but also because my primary complaint, that being Richter's movement speed, was actually was exacerbated by a couple of like optical illusions. When I played Rondo of Blood, I played it in 4:3 aspect ratio. And then the SNES emulator that I had installed is 8:7 by default, because that's closer to the SNES's native aspect ratio. Somewhat like, this is kind of like a larger debate in emulation, like what aspect ratio should you play games in, because there are people who say, well, why wouldn't you play in the fucking native resolution? Like that's what the console is designed to display. But then people argue, people counter that with, well, but all of these consoles were being played on 4:3 televisions. So like, even if the native resolution is 8:7 or is like a narrower aspect ratio, like really, everybody fucking played these games in 4:3. So like, so that's why the SNES emulator is an 8:7 instead of 4:3, is because that's closer to the SNES's native resolution, and that's why the Rondo emulator that I had was playing in 4:3 and not something narrower, which would be closer to the PC engine's native resolution, because of that central, like, that conflict in emulation. But I bring this all up because a character moving across the screen in 4:3 creates much more movement, or like much more of the appearance of movement than a character walking across the screen in 8x7. Because the screen is narrower, it's like moving more slowly. So the fact that I was going from 4x3 Rondo of Blood Richter Belmont to 8x7 Dracula X Richter Belmont, meant that he looked slower. He is slower. His movement speed is definitely slower in Dracula X than it is in Rondo of Blood. That's definitely the case. But the difference is being exacerbated both by the aspect ratio difference and also due to the fact that Richter's walk cycle in Dracula X is very fast. And when, like, the more steps, so it looks like it takes, like, more steps to cover a shorter amount of ground, which also creates this, like, optical illusion of the walking being slower. And I actually patched the game to slow down his walk cycle a little bit to sort of mitigate it looking like he's shuffling along like he just shit his pants and that he can barely move, which is the visual impression you get from playing Dracula X default. So playing this game in 4x3 and with the patch that altered the walk cycle, and I should clarify, all it did was change the walk cycle. It did not speed up his movement at all. It was purely like a visual thing. Once I had those two things in place, I realized that the lower movement speed was not as bad as I had initially thought. And so going into it with that, and also with the understanding of to think of this game basically as like a different kind of Castlevania game than Rondo of Blood. As a game that was more about like slower, methodical, like position, like intricate challenge, as opposed to Rondo, which is much more about like speed and action and presentation. Going in with that mindset allowed me to really appreciate this game. And I'm sorry that I haven't said anything specific about this run itself. To be fair, there's not really a whole lot to say about the early levels, except and everything that I think I would just be pointing out things that are fairly self-explanatory, like I used my first item crashes to deal with the Spear Knights in that first like double-tiered hallway. But I just needed to explain like where my difference in opinion, where the difference in my opinion of this game now compared to my opinion of this game then like comes from, and why I had this like epiphany almost. Because Dracula X is actually a really good game. If you think of it more as a successor to the NES games and to that style of gameplay and that speed and that like emphasis on a more methodical approach to the challenges that the game is putting before you, then you can kind of appreciate it for what it is. And just sort of understand that it's not going to be the kind of like high-octane, fast-paced experience that like Rondo or Bloodlines are, for example. So in that context, it's kind of a mixture of Rondo and the NES games, because it does have more of an emphasis on like slower movement, but it also has like the item crashes from Rondo, which are more desirable than ever because Dracula X really loves to throw tricky combat situations at you. As you've already seen, and this is going to continue, there's a lot of verticality in Dracula X. There's a lot of Medusa heads respawning. There's a lot of like platforms that go up and down. This level right here is sort of like, this is a level that's only accessible on the easy route of the game. I'll explain this a little bit. There's 3 routes in Dracula X. There's 2 level 4s and there's 2 level 5s. In the like normal route, you go through, you finish out level 3, and then you go to a different cave level with a Minotaur boss at the end. You beat the Minotaur boss, then you go to normal level 5. In the bad ending, you, which is accessible by falling off of that stage with the pillars that I was in before, you fall down here, and then you do normal level 5, and you get the bad ending. And then the best ending involves beating the boss of level 3, but then getting a key to leave level the main level 4, not this level, before you fight the boss of level 4, and then going to like alternate level 5. So that was a lot of words that probably didn't mean anything to you if you don't know anything about the game. But basically what I'm saying is there's different routes of the game. I'm only going to showcase 2 of them in this revisit, because they're the most different from each other. You're going to get to see all the levels, if not all the bosses, just in these 2 videos. And the next video that I post is not going to be a no damage, it's going to be a no death, and I'm going to explain why that is in that video. For now, I'm kind of already like struggling to fit in the larger scale. That little maneuver right there, like this, all of this was so specific. This last part of level 4. Most level 4 in the context of a no damage is not that difficult, but that part there with the mudmen and the spikes up above you is like super particular because you can't jump too much or else you'll bonk your head on the spikes, but you also can't like not jump or else you're stuck like sinking into the mud. So you do have to jump at some point, but you can accidentally jump into those mudmen if you're not careful. But with the trick that I discovered there was that, like a mudman will spawn and like another one spawns really quickly afterwards. So, that was just like a lot of trial and I shouldn't say trial and error. That took a little bit of getting used to. This boss is so fucking easy. Like, all you have to do is just spam axes at this guy and he just fucking dies. Which brings me to another thing about Dracula X that I should mention, that I think I did in my first videos, but I'll bring it up again here. Dracula X really reveals something about the nature of sub-weapon balance that I think is not clear from just the NES games, which is that I think that the issue with sub-weapons in Castlevania games is that it's very hard to balance the sub-weapons such that the axe doesn't end up being the best one, because the axe covers this upward diagonal angle that's usually the angle that Belmonts are the worst at covering. So in order to get the player to use a sub-weapon that's not the axe, the other sub-weapons that are not the axe usually have to be like overpowered in some way. And in Dracula X, they mostly fail to give you any reason to use anything besides the axe. There's some neat like boss tech with the knife on like the Minotaur or the Grim Reaper, who's on the other route. He's not going to be in this video. And like the cross I used on the Bat boss in level 2. But aside from that, like, this is just going to be the axe show from here on out. I don't think I ever use anything besides the axe after I kill the boss in level 2. I think I used the cross in the other video, so you'll see that. But this room right here, this is like so Dracula X right here, this room, because this is like Dracula X's favorite thing to do, is throw like birds or bats or Medusa heads and then like moving platforms and like vertical stages at you, which is why I say that the game is more like the NES games. It's more like Dracula's Curse. Not necessarily in the intricacies of how it plays, because Richter is a lot more flexible and a lot more mobile than Trevor is, but in terms of the fact that like the game's baseline philosophy is this like, we're gonna put you in these challenge levels, basically, and then it's gonna be up to you to use all the tools available to you in order to navigate them. And in Dracula X, the tools basically are the sub-weapons and the item crashes. In Dracula's Curse, by contrast, the tools were sub-weapons and then your companions, which makes that game more interesting from a strategic standpoint, but because the movement in that game is much more simplistic, there's also less room for, like, execution to make much of a difference. Dracula's Curse and Castlevania 1, to be honest, are very much games about, like, strategy and, like, sub-weapon selection. Dracula X has a nice balance between, like, sub-weapon selection and item crash usage / like heart management in general, and then execution being important. So it's kind of at this like border between like Rondo and Dracula's Curse, but I don't think it's better than either of those other two games for that mixture. I think it kind of takes. I think it's a cool idea, and it's definitely unique among all the classic Castlevanias in that regard, but it doesn't, I don't think it exceeds Rondo or exceeds Dracula's Curse by incorporating elements of the other. I will say this, though, and this is a common thing people say when they compare Dracula X to Rondo of Blood. Like, the level design in Dracula X is, like, way more intricate and thoughtful and, complicated and challenging than it is in Rondo of Blood. Because, like I said, the emphasis is on so much more so on the challenge, and not so much on the presentation and the pacing. Which I'm honestly, like, glad for, because the very existence of this game is kind of strange. I don't know what all the details are. My understanding of it is that, and this could be wrong, this is just what I've heard, is that there was some kind of exclusivity agreement with NEC, the company that owns the PC Engine, which is what Rondo of Blood was on, and Konami, where, like, Konami couldn't release a straight-up port of Rondo to the SNES, but Konami still had ownership of all the assets that went into making Rondo, so they just made a game with the same assets that was, like, a really different game. And this boss coming up right here is one of the hardest parts of the no damage component of the run. Like, no damaging this guy is super hard, but the werewolf in Dracula X is actually one of the few elements of the game that I think improves on Rondo of Blood. The Rondo of Blood werewolf is like a complete and total clusterfuck. The Rondo werewolf just spends the whole fight, like, spazzing out, and the game is basically just asking you to spam item crashes to kill it. The werewolf in Dracula X is much more of, like, a real boss fight, to the point that I can actually use 0 item crashes on the entire fight and still no damage it. Although I do item crash there just to avoid taking damage from his, like, final attack, because that's, like, really hard to dodge. So, like, Dracula X is not only, like, a good game in its own right, even though it's not a port of Rondo of Blood, there's actually a couple specific things that I think it does better than Rondo of Blood. I still do think Rondo of Blood's a better game overall, but this game is, like, really fucking good. You know, the music is not as good as the music in Rondo, but it's still, like, really good. Like, plenty of games have music that's not as good as the music in Rondo. The music in Rondo is almost, like, unchallenged in terms of its quality across the entire series. So that's why, even though this game is not a port of Rondo, I'm grateful for its existence, because it is a different kind of Castlevania challenge. And I would not have gone to the pain and misery of trying to getting this no damage run, even if it's the easiest route, unless I really liked it. So this is something that started happening in, like, my last attempts, was that item crash with the axe started missing that bird on the ledge. And that was, like, a very specific thing where if I item crashed as soon as I got up that flight of stairs, then the axe would miss. But if I got up the flight of stairs and then walked, like, a tiny bit over to the left, it would hit. And I knew that at this point, but I guess I didn't go far enough over to the left. I ended up wasting an item crash on that part. But that's okay, actually, because I didn't point this out, but during the Hunchback, the Igor Gauntlet, towards the start of level 5, which is another, like, really big reset point, because the Hunchbacks are very unpredictable. Usually I do at least 1 item crash during the Hunchback Gauntlet, but in this attempt I did 0. So so I kind of had some extra hearts to play around with. So I could item crash. I could fuck up an item crash to kill that bird during the second room of level 6, and it was all okay. And I actually haven't even mentioned yet why heart count is so important in this run. It's because heart count is not just important for having access to item crashes, it's also because there's a thing that they did in this game that was bad, but I didn't take damage, so I'm not going to reset. The reason, I guess I should explain this, like, the reason I was facing to the right there and trying to jump backwards onto the left was to make sure that the bat spawned to the right, because the bat will always spawn in the direction that you're facing. Another reason why heart count is important is because in, like, Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3, you would get, like, triple shot multipliers or double shot multipliers for your sub-weapons to let you throw them more frequently. But in Rondo, or in Dracula X rather, there are no, like, multiplier things you pick up. The way that it works is that if you have hearts above a certain number, you can use your sub-weapon more frequently. And that's really important because I want to be able to throw my axe as fast as possible on the Dracula fight. And what that means is that it means I want to get to the Dracula fight with 99 hearts, if possible. Like, if not 99, then as close to max as possible. Which means that I have to be very careful about my heart usage for the rest of the run, and I can't just, like, item crash wherever I want. I have to plan around that. This boss was also a reset point for me, even though the boss, like, this boss is not hard in regular gameplay, but it just took me a while to figure out, like, how to navigate around this fire attack. And what I eventually discovered was that the trick is just staying put over here on the left during the second pass, and just kind of manipulating this thing's movements and, like, bullying it around with the axe, instead of having to, like, chase it down all the time, which was the problem that I was having in my earlier attempts, where instead of just staying there on the left, I would try to dodge the eyeballs twice, and really only have to dodge the eyeballs once over on the right. So that was gratifying to finally figure that out, because in the idea of no damaging the easy route of Dracula X, my two big concerns were the Camilla fight and the werewolf fight. The werewolf fight I eventually figured out, like, was doable to no damage, it's just really hard. Camilla was more of a puzzle, but I did eventually figure it out anyway. Oh my god, I actually reset here once because I didn't, like, throw the axes fast enough or something, and, like, a stray fireball hit me. That was heartbreaking. Getting this footage took, like, way longer than it was supposed to. I remember getting to Dracula after, like, only 3 hours of attempts, and then, like, I just fucking, like, shit the bed and, like, beefed at the very end and died. And then it took me, like, another, like, fucking, like, 15 hours to get back to him again. It was so awful. So, this footage was pretty painful to get, honestly, but, and this is just on the fucking easy route. This is on a route where you, like, skip an entire boss. And you don't even fucking fight the Grim Reaper. So, there's a lot of creativity in Dracula X. Like, this whole level here, how it's a bunch of interconnected, it's like a bunch of interconnected rooms, is really, really interesting. So, that's why even though I don't think this game is as good as, like, Rondo or Bloodlines or Dracula's Curse, like, I don't think there's any other classic Castlevania games that are better than this. Like, I think this game is definitely, like, demonstrably, like, firmly, confidently better than Super Castlevania 4. Like, yeah, it's hard, and yes, it kind of has the same, like, challenge gimmicks a lot, repeating itself a lot, like a lot of moving platforms and a lot of Medusa heads, but, like, the gameplay is just so much more, like, solid and streamlined, and the level design is just so much more interesting. And it looks better, and it sounds better, and it plays better. And there are even occasionally meaningful decisions to make. I waited there for a second, because I didn't want to try to walk through, I didn't want to try to walk any further to the left until another Medusa head spawned, because I didn't want to, like, start walking to the left and then get ambushed by a spawn. Medusa heads aren't like, technically supposed to, like, spawn from a side of the screen that you're that close to, but, like, better safe than sorry. Speaking of better safe than sorry, we're now in the Dracula boss fight, which is, like, the epitome of better safe than sorry, the way that I play it. So, what's gonna happen here is the pillar that I'm crouching on right now is very important, that one that's the lowest towards the floor. Because if you crouch on that pillar, there's no attack that Dracula can do that can hit you, except for when he teleports right on top of it, of course. That's really important because the pattern for the Dracula boss fight goes like this. He'll shoot fireballs 3 times, then he'll shoot magma balls on the 4th time, at first, and then he'll do fireballs. No, he does. Wait, shit, I forgot. Basically, he'll do fireballs 4 times, then magma balls 5th time, at first, then I think it's 3 fireballs and then magma balls on the 4th one. My point is that what can happen in this fight is that Dracula can teleport off screen and then shoot stuff at you from off screen. And what this lower platform gives you is a place to stay that's always 100% safe. So if you're keeping track of his cycles, like, you know, if it's like, okay, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and then on number 4 it's going to be the magma balls, you can crouch down there to preemptively avoid them. And then for everything else you can crouch here. Then it's just a matter of knowing, like, which of his teleports... And then whenever he teleports into your field of view, you can just throw a couple axes at him, or throw like an axe at him, or 2 axes. But it's important to stay close to that lowermost pillar, because that gives you a safe zone that you can always immediately go back to. If you know he's on his, like, magma ball pattern, but you don't know where he is, and you don't know, like, and you just need a place to go to dodge. So what's happening now is I'm waiting for him to be in one of 2 spots before I phase him. Because what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to basically spam axes at his second phase at such an angle that I'm always going to intercept the fireballs he shoots at me. And that means I basically want him to be either on the pillar that I'm standing on now, or the pillar one over to my left, and it turns out to be this one, which is a little bit riskier to set up because I have to do a couple jumps ahead of time, but ultimately works out. You want to be below him, and this is why you want 99 hearts going into the fight, because you want to be able to throw axes as fast as possible to maximize your chances of intercepting his fireballs. So that's why that's really, really important, because otherwise, because those fireballs travel super fast, and you can't always, like, necessarily be certain that you're going to react in time to intercept them, especially because they can come at you from really strange angles. Like, they'll like, just barely miss your axe, and then, like, barely clip your big toe on the way down, and then hit you. That's what happened to me during my, my heartbreaking failure after 3 hours of attempts. I got to Dracula, and I thought I had a safe space to spam axes at him from, but then it turned out that I did not. And I died. So I made sure to be very, very careful about that this time. So that's the run. As you can see, Dracula X is also a remarkably short game if you are going through it at a brisk clip, and also if you're doing the fast route, or the easy route, because the easy route skips a boss fight, and also you go through what's a relatively much easier level than the other level 4. I kind of intended this video to be more me talking about the run itself, like blow by blow, but I ended up spending a lot of time talking about the game in general. I hope that's okay. I hope I was able to give some, like, insight on a few of the trickier gameplay areas. But I also think a lot of what I did sort of speaks for itself in terms of, like, how I approach the levels. A lot of what will trip you up in Dracula X is just, like, weird spawn timings, or like the gears and the platforms and the clock tower, like, fucking with you. You just kind of have to get used to navigating through those level features, and knowing, like, when you can land on the stairs, when to jump off of the gears, how to handle the bats. Sometimes the bats just fuck you, honestly, on that tall clock tower room with the spear knights. But there are always ways to, like, to sort of try to avoid that, like looking over to the right instead of the left, or, like, waiting for them to spawn. I don't know, I kind of wish I had more to say, or I wish I had said more earlier, but that's the video. I've got another Dracula X video coming up, and I'm going to try to make that one more of, like, a play-by-play, more of, like, a breakdown. In the meantime, hang in there and keep on Earth rocking.